Did you lose me? I
Oh,
got lost for a second.
apologies. Guys, I'm highly sorry. This is a paid session. I am recording this. I just needed to ask permission. Sorry for interruption. I should
Okay.
have asked that before. Everybody good with recording this? Thumbs up? Cool. Sorry, I should have asked this before. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Satya.
Sure. So, like I said, they are the ones who are helping the company decide what they want to do next, how they want to go forth and bring new things into the market, how to innovate, how to change, how to do the strategy of the company. To take an example, when Amazon was creating their own servers and they were doing the analysis of how much load comes on the servers, the architects of Amazon servers realized that during the peak period of October, November, and December, there's a lot of load on the servers, but the servers are typically free in the other part of the year because there is not a lot of shopping that people do, right? And that's how the innovation happened. That's how the cloud services came up. They decided that if I could rent out my servers and make some money out of it, then why not? My servers are anyway lying idle. So the architect came up with this idea, and that's what has started and created this new branch of Amazon called the AWS. The second part that I see an architect doing is owning the solution. There are a lot of moving parts that we see. There is business who is coming up with new requirements. There is regulatory change that comes up and says, hey, this is what my company has to do to abide by the regulations. There are a lot of solutions. There are a lot of technologies. The one person who owns all of it and ties it all together is the architect, right? He is the one who ensures that the solution scope and the technology risk are both managed together. And finally, the third point, which is something which a lot of us will debate about, is jointly own the delivery, right? An architect may not be officially responsible for delivery. He is not the service manager or the engagement manager that typically performs the role, but he or she is typically working with the clients, with the engagement managers to ensure the delivery is right. There are certain shared KPIs that an architect has, which he shares with the delivery manager and ensures the output is as per the design standards, as per the authority that was signed up with the client, right? So these are the three broad categories that I would put the objectives of architect about. Now let's tie the two together, agile and architecture. So let me start with a simple definition, right? Let's talk about agile. Agile means it's able to move quickly. And this is from the Oxford Dictionary. So it's not something that I made up. It's something which is already decided and denoted in the Oxford Dictionary. Agile is all about moving fast, a software development process through which you could take a lot of tasks together in short development cycles and release frequently to your clients. And if I do the definition of an architect, it is typically an art or practice of designing or constructing buildings. That's how it used to be earlier. In the IT world, it's basically the structural concept and the logical organization of a computer or a computer-based system. Now, if you look at this too, they look like they don't jive well together. One talks about us moving very fast, moving quickly. The other talks about designing large structure, large systems, and how they integrate with each other, right? So summarizing it, architecture is heavyweight, whereas agile is very slow, is very fast, is very lightweight, and it seems like it's unnecessary to do a lot of upfront design. So on the get-go, it looks like architecture and agile are not going to go well together, right? That's what it looks like. I know a lot of us think in that way, and that's why a lot of confusions also happen. But that question rises to one point. Agile Manifesto, right? For those who don't know the Agile Manifesto, it was written way back in 2001 when a set of people met in Salt Lake City, Utah, and said, we are not okay with the way the development happens today, the software development happens today. They were not okay with the way waterfall was working, and they started to do something different. And they said, this is what we're going to do different, and that is called the Agile Manifesto. I will not go deep into this for the session, but I'll talk about two key points in the manifesto. The point number one talks about working software over comprehensive documentation, right? We all know this. We don't focus on documentation, we'll focus on how the software works. And that leads to a question in people's mind. Does that mean we will not do any more documentation? Does that mean we'll not do any more design? And isn't it contradicting with what architecture typically does? That's one question that comes up into our mind. The second point that comes up into our mind is responding to a change over following a plan, right? Agile talks about not necessarily keeping a plan in stone and saying, this is what I'm going to do, but ensuring, yes, we have a plan, but we keep responding to the plan as and when the changes happen. So does that mean we don't need any more planning? Right? This is a typical question that comes into the mind whenever you see this manifesto, right? So let's go deep and see whether the manifesto really contradicts what Agile says or architecture says, or is actually supplementing. So let's see how the role of an architect changes when you get into the new mode of working, right? The point number one is architects should focus on the system, what it does, and how do you reduce your cost and increase your revenues, right? Now, the new way of working is not to run a project, but to run a product. It's more about a solution. It's more about how you empathize with your customer and bring in something that solves a problem, right? That's how the role of an architect changes. He or she is not going to look at an application or a solution or a blueprint that has been created and is to be adhered to for the next few years. He or she is now going to look at the overall revenue stream of the company. He or she is looking at how do you reduce the cost. The architect also delivers a framework that captures the essence of the system form, which means it is basically covering the overall application in a large view. So when I look at an architect, he or she is not focused on a solution from a single point of view. He's looking at it from a system standpoint. That is what we call systems thinking. So an architect looks at a problem statement from an overall landscape, looking at the big picture view, and then finding the right solution to form that particular requirement or the problem statement. The third point is to create a lean design with the foundation for responsiveness to change. There are a lot of changes that are happening. We are not in an environment where you used to build solutions for 1 year and then say we'll go to the public, we'll go to the live client. Nowadays, the life cycle of a product is maybe 6 months, right? So we cannot have a design that runs for 1 year or a solution that runs for a few months and then take it to the client, right? We have to be fast enough. We have to be responsive to the change, and that calls for a lean design. So we'll talk a bit about how lean design works and how you fit into the overall scheme of things. Uh, the other point that we talked about in the previous slide, which is about documentation. A lot of us did a lot of documentation in the old ways of working. We used to have a design document, a test script, a test plan. A lot of these were not really necessary, but we had to do it because that is how the process governed us to do. What we are now talking about is necessary documentation, the bare minimum things that are required for us to be able to deliver that working software that we need to give to our customers. To give an example, I was working for a client and we were discussing on how do we do a documentation. And the final answer that came up was, we'll write the comments in the code in a very beautiful and detailed way, and that will act as our documentation. So instead of creating a design document or a test script and all of that, we decided to use the code and put comments in there, and that comment will act as the outcome. It's a great way. It's actually a very elegant solution of how you really document the outcome. There are times when you have to refer back to documentations to understand why it was done in the way it is done. And to do that, documentation is necessary, but not what it used to be in the past. So we have to think in that line and accordingly change our direction to ensure we define what this necessary means. And mind you, necessary will vary from people to people, company to company. What may be necessary for me is not going to be necessary for you or vice versa. And finally, design should be based on the foundation of usability, right? Gone are those days when we build something based on something that we thought as a business guy or a technology guy, and we lumped it on to the customer to say, hey, this is what you have to use. It's actually the opposite now. A lot of concepts have come in around design thinking, and it's nothing but thinking about how a customer does business, right? How a customer wants the output. It's all about the user experience. So role of the architect goes from the way it was working earlier, which is how he or she wants it, to how the customer wants it. To take an example, right? Tesla as a company, it is not just a car company, it is an insurance company. It is a company that has got all these charging stations across the board. It is a company that has got a set of software that can help you drive across the country and tell you when you should charge and where is the nearest charging station, right? If I ask you how much money Tesla makes from selling a car, it will be way lesser than the money that it makes post the car has been sold, right? It is the experience that they are selling. It is not the car that they're selling. Every company in the world can build an electric car, and they are now trying to do it. But why is Tesla ahead of the game? It's the usability, it's the user experience that they're bringing. And that is how they have architected their solutions. That is how they have architected their systems. And that is how they're able to give the value to the customer that they feel are missing from the other areas that they're working on. Okay. So as we have seen, there is a difference in how the classic engineering was done and how the lean architecture is done. So if I understand the basics and go through the points, classic software architecture, and I'm using this term to hide that word, which is called waterfall. We all know that. It included engineering in the beginning, to build a very high level design. And that design used to be used to create the architecture and then the final product. Whereas in lean architecture, we're trying to defer the engineering to as much as possible. We're trying to get more details around the requirements. The stories are more clear. People know what they're going to build and see how we can supplement that with a real architecture that can support them. We're trying to do a lot of things because we fear the change, right? We try to limit the change. Every time you create a plan, we try to adhere to the plan, right? That is how we used to do it in the past. Whereas what we are going to do now is we're going to create something that gives us the wiggle room, right? A basic set of requirements around which we can play. The way I call it is it's like the play area in a mall. You take your kid to a play area, you put the kid inside that boundary. The kid can play around, he can play on any toy that is available, but he or she won't jump out of the boundary. So you create that boundary for your team and give them the wiggle room to play around. Let them decide the best way to come out of it rather than enforcing the architecture, right? And that is what leads into the point number 3, which is we used to do a lot of implementations in the beginning. We'll create our platforms, we'll do a lot of library. The systems team, as we call it today, had a lot of work that was done upfront. They would create a lot of stuff, and then that stuff would be used to build the final outcome. Whereas we're trying to defer the implementation now by creating basic structure, and that's what we are calling the architecture runway from SAFe. We'll talk about it in a few slides. That's what we build, and then leave it to the people to decide how they want to use it. So the implementation gets deferred. Uh, Point number 4 around documentation, and we refer to that in the manifesto. We are always going for a documentation. We can never say that documentation is not required. But the focus should not be just a document. The focus should be how best we can take it further. Just to take an example, it's a funny fight, and people who are in the project management will be able to correlate to it. I was working on that was actually an audit for my project. And the auditor was hell bent on saying, where is the sign off that your code has been deployed, right? And I said, the sign off is the code has passed through the set of criteria that we set. The software that we're using, right? The pipeline that we had built already certified that the criteria are met and the code has been promoted to production. And this is the log that shows it all. And that person was hellbent that no, I will not accept this log. I want you to give me an email from the client that says, yes, they have completed the work and they have submitted it. So that is the difference, right? The documentation, which was an email earlier, is now the log that comes out of your CI/CD pipeline. That's the change that we have to do, which feeds into the next point, which is tools and notions. We used to focus a lot on the tools, how we get the job done through those set of tools. If the approval is not recorded in the tool, then we cannot move on. But like we talked about in Agile and in the first point of the manifesto, the focus is now on the people. The focus is now on how the people work and how they interact with each other. Right? Going back to our old ways, we had this specialized planning and control, and a lot of us know it. We used to do a lot of planning. Microsoft Project Plan, MPP, used to be the tool of choice. There are a lot of other tools in the market. That has now gone away. It is not completely gone away, but it has gone into a mode of collective planning and cooperation. So instead of one person sitting and saying, this is what the team will do for the next 1 year, it is now a collective planning where the entire team comes together, cooperates with each other, and then decides what they want to build. And finally, the last point, which I could feel is very important, is the technical coupling and cohesion that was happening earlier, right? There were a lot of details, there were a lot of moving parts, and they all had to come together to finally give the outcome that you wanted to do. Whereas when I go to the lean architecture, the change now shifts for the end user mental model. That's what I was talking to when I was talking about the experience. There are multiple tools, there are multiple APIs, there are multiple products. It does not matter what they are. All it matters is how I am giving an outcome to my end user. How are they feeling, right? A lot of the people would like to have a thing done in single click, versus 50 clicks because there are 50 software applications deployed across the board. So that's how the architecture has changed. It is no more just focused on technology. It has now slowly moved from technology to people to the overall user experience. Right? That's where the concepts of design thinking also come in. Right? So we are now looking at an architect as a person who knows a lot. He helps create that overall environment or the structure or the feel that the end users of the company are going to get. Okay. So let's talk about a few points. And these are some of the great points which, as an architect, we should always keep in mind. Point number one, and I refer to that, architect products, not just solutions or projects, right? In the past, the architects were purely focused on what the requirements have come on from the business side and how I can deliver it from the technology stack that is available for me. So business and technology were the two key points that the architects were focused on. The third dimension that comes in now is the user view. And that's what I was referring to on the user experience standpoint. The users, how they want to see the product, how they want to use the product is something that the architect takes in and then uses these three views to create a product view. And that's the product that you give to the end customer, right? Think of the product as the outcome of the company. Think of the product as something that the customer touches, feels, and gets the benefit of. And the way the product has been created, the way the product gives an experience to the user, that's how the company is going to thrive. The other points, what are the key focus area of an architect? The architect focuses on the quality attributes, not on the functional part of things. So the architect will not be able to say whether there should be a submit button here or there. That's something which your business has to decide. But the architect should be able to say that this screen should pop up in 2 seconds, or this screen should have certain number of robustness. Even if I click on this screen for 50 times, it will not break. If I'm building in hardware, right? You see a lot of phones coming in and there are a lot of tests that happen in the backend, which says this phone has been switched on and off 500,000 times, or this camera has been flipped up and down 200,000 times and it supports. That talks about the robustness. That talks about the usability, right? These non-functional requirements, as we used to call in the past, are the key things that an architect focuses on. The next point is something which we have talked about, and we'll just quickly touch upon them again. Delay the design decisions until absolutely necessary. This is something which we have touched upon many times, and believe me, it's one of the most difficult things to do. You have to look at the overall scheme of things. In my example here, I put application, a retail application, where there is a quote, there is an order, and there is a fulfillment system. And there are multiple technical people who are working inside, as you can see here. But the architect should not look at this and say, hey, this is what a service specialist should do, or this is what a DBA should do. The architect looks at the overall scheme of things and sees how best I can map the requirements from the client standpoint to how these guys in the flow build the application. They're going to model the organization around the system, not create the systems around the technical feasibility. This is one of the points which is one of the key bottlenecks that I've seen in a lot of implementations. We always build our applications and then have the technical people govern how the application will be focused on or how the application will be sliced. The way the architect has to be done now is to ensure that we build the system, we look at the requirement of the system, how the customer wants it, and then place the technology stack inside to match that requirement. And we also obviously have to manage the trade-offs, because I can be an architect, I can give you a design of a building that costs you $2 billion, but you may not have enough money to it, right? You give me $1 million and say, build me the best solution with that money. And that's how you manage the trade-offs. You have to let go of certain things because the budget is not enough, but you have to decide what are those things that I can let go of and thereby fulfill what is required to be done. Okay. And finally, this is what I was touching upon, which is architect for build, test, and deploy, which is the continuous deployment. So what we're talking about in the past, what we used to do is we used to have one set of people write the requirements, then a set of people doing the agile iteration, which is our development. And then we do a lot of testing in the end and finally deploy, right? We call this agile because yes, we are doing sprints, we are doing iterations. But if you look at the long run, we are not really doing agile. We are just splitting the development into smaller pieces. But finally, the deployment, the release is all happening in a waterfall way. That's what we call the last mile. If I change the way of working, what we are now doing is we are doing agile iterations in a sequence. So we do the iteration, we integrate the work that has been done, and we deploy the release. And that is what our continuous deployment pipeline or the continuous delivery pipeline means. So we do small set of works. There are multiple teams that work on it. These applications are then integrated and then deployed. Now there is a slight change. We are calling it deploy and release. Deployment, in my view, is something that you take to a pre-production environment or a staging environment, which is replicating your production environment, but not necessarily accessible to your end customers. It is something like a beta testing. You might get an offer saying, if you're willing to do beta testing, you can click on this. And the moment you click on that, you are actually given access to this deployed code in the staging environment. And once that code has been tested, integrated, and it has got the end user's functionality in one full circle, it can then be released to the customer. So this is how the change and thought process happens in an architect. A lot of the years, maybe starting 2012 when Agile started picking up, the first method was one which was very prevalent. People used to do development in iterations, but post that, it was all the old ways of working. And that's how the architect has to change to bring in this new method where it helps you integrate and deploy everything in an agile fashion. Okay. With that, let me talk about and introduce yourself to SAFe, Scaled Agile, before I pass on the baton to Daryl to talk about the SAFe architecture piece of it. SAFe is nothing but a scaling framework, right? So if I give an example, and I always use this, I find it very really apt. All of us know Linux came in 2000s, right? Early 2000 or 90s actually. And people thought it's a great operating system. It'll kill Windows. It's one of the best in the world. It could not do anything. It could not even dent the market share of Windows. But the same Linux was adapted by Google and created into Android. And Android covers 95% of the world's smartphones. So what's the difference between Android and Linux? I don't think there is any. The core of Android is Linux. But Android adds a lot of other features that makes it easy for the end users to adapt it. And that is where Linux was not able to. The way I compare it, Agile is good. Agile had a lot of great things, but it never talked about how do I implement this method of Agile in a large company of 5,000 people. It never talked about the delivery model. It never talked about how do I have vendors working in a company with my own employees and ensure delivery is happening. It did not talk a lot about the tools and automation. It did not talk about what are the various levels of organization. It did not talk about when to do testing, how to do testing, all of that. Project management is one area which was completely missing in the past, right? I mean, I know a lot of project manager friends of mine who used to say, with Agile coming, I might lose my job, right? That was one of the people's thought that Agile is anti-project management, right? Similarly, how to build programs, how to build initiatives, and end of the day, tie it up to the portfolio level. And portfolio is where the organization runs, the top level of the company. These are some of the things which are missing in the old ways, the core agile. And that is where a lot of scaling frameworks came in, SAFe being one of them. SAFe did a very clear oversight of what companies should do coming into delivering all this that you see in this triangle. And it did not deviate from any of the core principles or practice of Agile, but it used those core principles to build on and deliver what we are trying to deliver in a safe environment. So SAFe is one of the most key frameworks of choice when it comes to adopting Agile in large enterprises. And SAFe does have a very unique perspective into how architecture works in SAFe. May I just use this time to call upon Daryl to speak on the next few set of slides, where we talk about the architecture runway and the various things in Agile architecture.
Thanks very much, Satya. Hi, everyone. My name is Daryl. I'm an Agile coach and a SAFe trainer, and I'm going to take a few slides here to talk to you about how SAFe does architecture. So after that great introduction that Satya's done on, changing the thought processes and the mindset of architecture in an Agile world and the principles that it's based on, so now we're going to move into one framework, SAFe. We're going to talk about specifically how it recommends architecture is handled in a scaled agile environment. So the first thing to do is to talk to you about this concept of an architecture runway. You can see on the screen here. So the concept of an architecture runway, my favorite way to explain it is, I don't know how many of you are as old as me, but back in the olden days, we used to watch these cartoons where you would have a train going along the tracks, and then one of the characters would be right out the front of the train, and they're laying down the tracks as fast as they can. And just as they lay down the tracks, the train is rolling onto the tracks just in time. So the concept of it is a bit like that. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to lay the tracks so that the train has a solid rail to run onto. Okay, and what we're doing here is we want to get it just in time. We want to have it be at the last responsible moment to lay that track. So what we're avoiding here is spending a lot of money up front, building the railway line, and potentially, you know, in today's modern changing VUCA world, you know, we get a kilometre down the road and suddenly be told, I know you laid the track all the way to Sydney, but now we need to go to Adelaide instead. And so you've wasted all that time and money and effort laying all that track. We don't want to spend all our money up front on building out this huge, vast architecture, only to find that, you know, the technology is out of date, or a competitor has released a new product that's better, or, you know, something in the architectural landscape has changed, and we now want to incorporate that, or we want to respond to that change, and we've spent all our money already. So that's what we're trying to avoid. So we want to build out the architecture in front of us just far enough to make sure that we can still, you know, move forward. What we don't want to do, as well as moving it out too far ahead, we also don't want to have not enough track. Because if we run out of track, then the train goes off the rails, right? And it falls over. And that's generally considered a bad thing, TM, right? So what we want to do is we want to find that Goldilocks zone in the middle. Okay, we want to have enough track so that we're keeping up with and staying ahead of the train. And at the same time, we want to make sure that we are doing it in a way that we can be responsive to changes in direction, you know, if we need to. So the idea behind this architectural runway is that we build it up and then we consume it back down. Build it up, consume it down. And we're always trying to keep it, oh, hang on, jump back. Wasn't quite there yet. Go back one more, Satya. Never mind, we're onto that one now. All right, let's just keep going then. I wanted to just quickly point out that in SAFE, there are two different types of items in backlogs at a scaled level. And that is, oh, there we go, thank you. So you'll see there we've got the blue backlog items there called features. So features are things that the customer is going to see, our business is going to see. They're the things that give direct user value so that they make money or whatever it is they do. Okay, and then we've got the red ones. I need to talk faster. Is that what you're telling me? The red ones are called enablers. So enablers are things that are not directly visible to the users or the business or the customers. Okay, they don't see it directly, but the way it adds value is what we call indirect value. So the enablers make the features possible. So the enablers might be architecture or infrastructure, or there might even be things like exploration. But what they do is they make it possible for the teams to do the features, which then go out and make money for the business. So we have this concept of when we do the enablers, the red ones, they build the architecture runway up. So you can see there the little red dotted line that goes up. Every time we do a red enabler, that dotted line goes up. And then the features come along behind and they consume the architecture or the infrastructure and they use it up and they deliver something of value out to the business or to the customers. Okay, and so that because they've used it up, the architecture runway drops back down a bit. And then we do enablers to build it up and features to drop it down. And that's why the architecture runway is shown as being a zigzag line. It goes up and down and up and down. So what that's showing is we're doing the enablers to build out the architecture and the infrastructure, and then the train comes along behind it and uses up those by doing features, and that drops back down again. So we want to keep the height of that architecture runway in a Goldilocks zone. We want to keep it just right, not too hot, not too cold, just right. Okay. So what we do is we work out how much of our capacity we want to spend each time box, whether that's quarterly or whatever it is. We want to make sure that we're putting some of our capacity into doing those enablers so that we build the runway up, and then we're putting the rest of our capacity into doing the features that's going to deliver the value for our customers and for our business, and they're going to drop it back down again. And we keep that balance. We tweak it every single time. Okay. All right, jump on to the next one. Sorry about that, Satya. Sorry about the back and forward, folks. So here we go, another way of looking at that, the same sort of thing that each time, each backlog, we have things that are going to build that runway up higher and higher. And maybe there's a big push, right? Maybe it's at the start of a project or at the start of an upgrade, or maybe there's a big replatforming coming up. And so what we do is we do a concerted push, right? A heavy lift. We put a bunch of enablers into the backlogs, and we build the architecture runway up a bit ahead. And then we come through and we deliver a suite of features, and those features will drop that runway back down again over time as we use it up. Okay, is that making sense? Was there people understanding? Yeah, give me thumbs up. Excellent. All right. All right, so as you can see here, then we have the technology teams. They might be infrastructure teams, they might be architecture teams, systems teams, they're called in SAFe, and they help the other teams. They would help them with expertise, they can help with deployments, they can help with automation, and they're helping those teams get those architectural runway enablers into the backlogs, help them get delivered, integrate them together, build that runway up. And then the feature teams are coming along behind like the train, doing those features and using that runway up, and then it comes back down again. So the idea here is that an agile, especially a scaled agile architecture, is constantly thinking in terms of how far ahead of the train are we? How far do we need to be? What emerging technologies are coming up? What things do we need to be exploring? How close is the train coming to being able to use that? When is the train going to need to use those things? And keeping that balance going and tweaking it all the time dynamically. Okay. Next slide, please. So one of the things here is that in the past, and no offense to any architects on the call, please don't hold this against me. But in many ways, because we were arranged in silos, we were arranged in functional groups. All of the architects would work together to do their work, and then they would hand off the architects to teams to go ahead and implement. And if the teams had questions, or if there were things that had changed, new technologies, or something they didn't understand, or even, God help us, mistakes, then they needed to go back and talk to the architects again to clarify that or to get further work done. But in a traditional way of working, where were those architects by the time the teams are working on delivering it? They're gone, aren't they? They've moved on to the next project, right? So it's really hard to say, can you just stop working on what you're working on now and come back and work with me on this project that you did 12 months ago, 18 months ago. You don't remember it, but we need to change it, right? It makes it really difficult. So what we're talking about with an agile architecture is a collaborative effort. Make it a team sport, right? Let's all work together on this. So let's have the really talented, the really skilled architects, the people with those architecture skills, let's have them part of shared services teams. Let's have them part of systems teams. Let's have them working with the teams, and we're designing we're coming up with the architecture and so on just ahead of the train, so that they're still available. We can work with them together. We don't have to try and pull them off what they were working on before. We're still all working on it, and we're working on it together. Now, one of the key points here, one of the things that this allows, which is doesn't happen, not allowed in the old way of working, is that we get teams that are, we hire good people, they're clever people, they're motivated people, and they're even more so when they're working in agile teams. And one of the things that we do is we say to them, this is the goal, this is where we want to get to, but we're not going to tell you how to do it, right? You guys are really good, creative, clever people, right? You may be able to come up with better ways of doing it than we thought of before, right? And we want that. So we're going to tell you the goal, and we're going to encourage you to come up with the way of getting to that goal, right? We need to build a bridge. You guys work out how to build the bridge. And so what that means is that teams working on it may come up with faster ideas, cleverer ideas, right? Thinking outside the box, alternative solutions. They may harness new technologies in ways we never thought of. And that's called emergent design. These teams can come up with things that just emerges out of the process. It's not predefined, it's not locked in, right? It happens along the way. So that's something that we want to happen. But at the same time, we don't want to just leave these teams hanging, right? We don't want to just chuck them in the deep end and say, oh, you'll be right. Come up with the whole design and the architecture and everything on the fly. Okay, we don't want that. That's not responsible. It's not supportive to the teams. So we want to have enough of a roadmap, enough of an idea of where it's going so that they've got support, they've got guardrails. Okay, we call that intentional architecture. So we want to know enough about that architectural vision to enable the teams to be able to work within that to come up with those clever, inventive ways of doing things. So this is a balance. Again, so many things in Agile are about a balance. Okay, we're trying to balance. We want enough vision and structure so that they've got intentional architecture. They know where they're going. But we also want them to have enough leeway that they've got room to do this emergent design. So we find that balance, okay? So that means, again, being just in time, right, in front of the train, but having an idea of where we're going at the same time, okay? Next slide, please. So in SAFe, the way this is done is that they extend the idea of a CI/CD pipeline to include an additional phase, which is continuous exploration. So we have continuous exploration, continuous integration, continuous deployment. Those three things are indicated by those circles there. They're always happening. They're constantly going. They never ever stop. Right? We're always exploring. We're exploring our user requirements. We're exploring our market needs. We're exploring emerging technologies. We're exploring what we learn from doing what we do. All of that exploration is constantly going on to enable us to be as responsive and as up to date as possible. And as we find things out of that exploration, we're constantly integrating together the work that we do across multiple teams, the work that we are currently introducing into the environment we're going into. So we're constantly doing that integration, and then we're constantly deploying out into production. And then that whole cycle, those multiple cycles are going all the time. But then we decouple the release. So we might be deploying things like Satya just said a minute ago into a staging environment, or even when we get really good at this, when it's like working like a well-oiled machine, right? When it's really good, then we're actually deploying directly into production. But it might be feature flagged off. It might have access control lists so people don't see it, right? But we're actually deploying into production all the time, 10,000 times a day. But it's not necessarily available or visible or usable by our end customers. Okay, it goes in dark, toggled off, whatever it is. And then what we do is we have our business, our people who know about markets, about marketing, about events, about all sorts of things like that. They package up all the different features that make sense and that are going to give them the best economic return, right? And they do releases when they're ready. And because those things are decoupled, it can go into production as the development team can create it, right? As the teams and the trains can develop it and deploy it. And then when it makes sense, the business can release it. So that's putting the value creation in the hands of the development teams and the release in the hands of the business. Okay, so that's what that decouple does. And you can see there, we're always going through that cycle. We're going through the build, measure, learn phase, but we're also coming up with new hypotheses out of our continuous exploration. You know, a new hypothesis of, well, if we did this, that would give us this benefit. Well, let's go find out, right? Or if we solve this problem, it would make this better. Well, let's go find out. So this cycle is always happening. All right, next one. So in SAFe, the way we look at this, the way we assess how we're doing with this, and are all of those elements of the puzzle, are they functioning? And which ones are functioning better than the others? Where do we need to focus our attentions? So we have a health radar. So if any of you have seen any of the team health radars or anything like that, it works in the same sort of way. There are a whole bunch of dimensions to it and a rating on each dimension, and they'll give you a pretty spider web diagram out at the end of it. So you'll see here we've got one quadrant for each one of those sections. We've got the exploration, integration, deployment, and then our release on demand part where the business do their part. Okay. So let's have a quick look at each one of those quadrants. Now, as you can see, each one of those has, 3 to 4 sections in it. Each one of those is a separate dimension of, our level of maturity and our level of experience and our level of capability, in that area. So from an architecture point of view, we have a lens on each one of these quadrants. Okay. So with the exploration one, we want to think about architecting not just for an entire end solution. We want to think about architecting for what we call MVPs and MMFs. Okay. An MVP is one of the most bandied around terms, but how many people actually know what an MVP really means? Okay. So in SAFe, it has a specific meaning, which is that we generate a hypothesis. Our hypothesis is, if we do this, we'll get this result. That's our hypothesis. And then we do an experiment to test it, to validate or to invalidate and disprove that hypothesis. And an MVP is the smallest amount of work, of value, that we can do that will let us prove or disprove that hypothesis. That's what an MVP means. Okay, we don't keep going with it once it's validated or invalidated that hypothesis yet. Okay, we stop and assess. If it's validated the hypothesis, then we might say, okay, let's proceed to the entire implementation. Okay, that's a persevere decision. Okay, if it invalidated our hypothesis, if it turns out that it's not true, right? We went and did the experiment. We think users are going to love this. They don't. So we pivot instead. We try something else. Okay, or we just stop. We just kill it, right? So that decision process, that scientific method process, we need to take that into account in our architecture, because how much architecture do we need to do in order to be able to construct an MVP, right? What does the architecture look like? Is it going to be the same architecture as if we proceed to the final solution? Or is there something that we can do for much, much less that will help us still make that decision? And then we can proceed to the architecture, infrastructure, whatever it is, for the full-blown decision. So it's a very different way of thinking about it from, we need to architect the entire solution up front to be scalable, last for 5 years, etc., etc. Very different lens. Okay, next one, please. Thank you. So continuous integration, this is one of the ones that people are probably more easily recognize that they would associate with an agile architecture. We need to architect our CI/CD pipeline. We need to know what it needs to do and how it's going to work. We may need assistance from architecture, both in the thinking about it and also in the implementing of it, but then also in the scaling of it over time. But again, this is, part of the shift in, architects thinking about, well, what would that need to look like? What would a pipeline need to look like in terms of, well, robustness, but also in terms of the homogeneity of the environments? So in the past, architects would typically be under budgetary constraints to create testing environments and staging environments that were very, very different from production. No load balancing, no, failovers, all sorts of stuff. Now, if we're going to do this continuous integration and then following on now the continuous deployment one, jump over to the next one for us, Satya. We need to have those environments scaling and be as close as possible, as similar as possible. And ideally, if we can utilize cloud to do that, then it's easy to spin up environments. We can script them. And that makes it much, much easier to have those environments be much more homogeneous to allow us to, have the fidelity and the quality of our testing and automation and our CI/CD pipeline. And then it brings in the next architecture aspect of thinking about, okay, if we're going to do that deploy into production and not have it available, okay, so that we can decouple the release from it, well, what does that mean for our architecture? What does that mean? Are we going to do it through access control, through feature toggles, etc.? And what do we need to allow if we're going to do that? And sometimes we need to also think about how much of that we're going to do. If we start putting lots and lots of things into production and we want to bundle them up and do bigger releases, then we need to think about the load. We need to think about the branching effect that that's going to have on our test cases. So there's lots of implications there for us to think about differently from an architecture point of view. Next one, please. Thank you. So do you want me to do the summary, Satya, or do you want to jump back in?
I can do that. No worries. I think I'll just combine the thoughts that both of us had and just complete the summary if that's okay.
Wonderful. I'll hand you
Thank you.
back to your capable host of Satya. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Daryl. Thanks for walking us through the safe way of architecting it. Yeah, it sounds nice, right? Safe way of architecting, SAFE, right? So yeah. All right. So the principles, right? In principle, we want to delay the design decisions as much as possible. That's one of the key things that we learned. And we would like to architect for change and we'll want to enable interoperability. That's something which was missing in the past. We were always trying to architect something which was always designed the way it is to be, whereas the change was always in the backseat. So that's a change that we need to work on and continue to, encourage our architects to do. A few methods that we talked about. We talked about the architecture runway and how we build the solutions up top of it. I think that it used a very nice analogy, how the train is running and the tracks are getting formed right next to it. But obviously we need to know the direction, right? I'm going from place A to place B. I would not be laying track to go to place number C. So that's something which will obviously be key when the architect is building that. And finally, the most important thing, manage products, not projects. That's the old way of doing things. I know old may sound very old now, but yeah, it's not very far in the past when we used to do that. And we still do in a lot of areas, a lot of clients, a lot of projects. But yes, we want to get out of the mindset and come into this mode of building products than building projects. So that's all we had for the session. Now we'll open it up for any questions that you may have and any doubts or anything that you'd like to get answers about.
Not that we've left a lot of time for questions. Sorry, I talked too much.
Oh, I didn't see the time. Oh man, we are just 2 minutes left. I didn't know that. But yeah, I think, yeah, that was the point. I know we took a little over, but yes, quickly we can take maybe one question.
Yeah, I know this is, we have open up question, but we'll have Satya and Daryl stay back if you'd like to stay back and ask questions as well. But
Sure.
any questions? I think Sanjay had one question. Go on, Satya.
Sanjay's question, I'm coming from a PM perspective. I understand the idea of deferring the architecture decision, but that adds a lot of risk to the project. Well, that's actually a really great point, Sanjay. One of the things is you've got to look at is that it's relative, right? You're weighing up your risk. So on the one hand, you might say it's going to add risk if I defer the architectural decisions. But then you've got to weigh up how much risk are you taking on in architecting a project or some sort of big system or solution when the world is changing as fast as it's changing, right? I mean, I can't even tell you whether I'm going to be working in the office next week, let alone next month. What's the world going to look like in 3 months, 6 months? I don't know. Are we going to have Facebook in Australia? Who can say, right? So when the world is changing that fast, what's the risk that you go and do a massive, big upfront architecture, invest all this money in designing it, and then you go and implement it and you buy licenses and you buy hardware, maybe you even buy a whole data center, and then halfway, 3/4 of the way through the project, the world's changed and you are now high and dry. So you got to weigh up the risk, right?
Absolutely.
So remember the idea that we're suggesting here is that you delay your architectural decisions to the last responsible moment, but no later, right? No later. So you've got to still be responsible. You've got to make enough of your architectural decisions at the right timing. And is it a bit of an art to work out not too early, not too late, just right? Yeah, it is. There's still a great world for the art and craft of the agile architect, right? We're not going to have robots doing it anytime soon.
Absolutely.
There's a bit of trial and error in it, but yes, that's what.
Daryl, one follow up. Yeah, on follow up that one follow up question on that. To be able to visualize how the end architecture will look like, do you recommend managing a separate backlog for architecture, or how is that managed? I mean, how as a program manager, I should be able to see what my end goal looks like. Not build it, but at least be able to visualize it in my mind. Absolutely. So that I'm comfortable that this is what I'm going to be, because most of the time I'm actually delivering something for a client. Absolutely. And my key priority on a program is to actually deliver a successful product for a client.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah, there's a difference between, flying blind and having no idea where you're going and having all the decisions for the next 10 years locked in, right? So there's a middle ground, right? So you can have a vision, you can have a roadmap, you can know where you're going and what it's going to look like, but only the next little bit in front of you is committed. Okay, you defer enough of the decisions where you can, where it's responsible, so that you can still be responsive. You can still adopt, emerging technologies. You can still do an about face if you need to, right?
Yeah.
So you have a plan, but it's not 100% locked in stone for the next 10 years.
I think
The
the
other
assumption,
aspect that
Des.
you need to think of is also cost. Sorry.
Sorry, Nick?
Yes. Hey, Des. Good to see you, mate. By the way, and great preso as always. I love listening to you talk about all things agile. I think there's a big assumption here in project delivery that everything's static, right? And you only have to look at scope variations to realize how things actually change. I think a lot of people think that things are locked in, yet just look at scope creep and scope variations. What is that? That's actually just responding to change most of the time, right? I didn't realize that was a function that we needed, but we do need it. Okay, great. Let's put that in. And I think the idea and the construct around your architecture runway being not so static as well. Like, I mean, Daryl describes it as quite a precise process. I'm sorry, Safe describes it as a very precise process. But I think if you actually adapt that process to where you feel you need, like if sometimes your backlog might need more enablement work just to get enough of the track built. Sometimes it's less because you've already done all the work, right? So you can utilize those people into greater areas of capability development. I think that's where this flexibility really comes in. I don't think it's about just setting and forgetting architecture in this well-defined, well-constructed framework. It's about adjusting it as you go through, but being very clear about what the outcome is that you're trying to create. Not just, I'm here to create a product, I'm actually here to create an outcome. And that outcome might evolve as it goes along.
Absolutely.
Very rightly put.
Satya, do I have 1 more minute to ask one more question?
I'm sure if you can stay on.
Just check. I think was there any others? I think just so that we share it around. Got to share the love. Michael said, in my opinion, it's okay to defer the decision, but some of the thinking analysis should still start early. Absolutely, exactly right. Exactly what we're saying. Yep, very good. And then there's some information in the chat channel about the Women's Leadership Meetup. Highly encourage you to go to that one if that's your thing as well. Really good. All right. I know that we are a bit over time, so if you need to drop off, go ahead and drop off. Sanjay, you were asking for 1 more minute.
Yeah, one more question. So it's again based on the fact that we are actually deferring the final architecture design towards the end.
Yeah.
Does it not then hamper with some of our non-functional requirements? I had a personal experience recently where
so I'll offer you I'll offer you an alternative viewpoint. So instead of deferring to the end, what if there was no end?
There was not, exactly.
Right. What if instead of being an end, what about if it was a continuum forever? Right? What if we had long-standing teams? What about if it was an ongoing process? What if we were always evolving it, always improving it? And so rather than it being an end point, what if it was a journey?
Yeah. Think of an Apple example, right? You have got an iOS which upgrades every year. It's a never-ending process. Don't think of iOS as a project. Think of it as a product that is evolving every year. iOS 14.1, next year 14.2, and likewise. So it's a journey that continues, and you make decisions as you go forth. So in the latest iOS, they added the option of creating some movable widgets across the screen. Right? That's something the other companies would have done in the past, but they realized that now we should do it. Now something new will come in 15, something new will come in 16, more security updates will come, but it's a never-ending journey. So think of it in that way, and then you realize, do I need to take a call here, or do I need to take a call a little later?
Awesome. Thanks a lot, guys. Again, I know there is quite a lot of questions. I'll just take 1 minute before you go, and I would like to take a picture at the end. So if you can just stay for 1 minute. Yep. I will. The first thing is, thanks a lot, Daryl and Satya. You were phenomenal. Just from the questions, we will know about that. I just wanted to quickly seed in a couple of things. We have Isabel over here. And basically, we are having the Women's Day celebration where we have 4 panelists across Isabel, Dr. Louis, we have James, we have as well as Craig Brown, who are phenomenal in talking about the space of exactly at that point in time towards agility as well as women in leadership, right? The second thing I want to talk about is the fact that in Incremental, we bring a lot of experience, the likes of Daryl, who has 50 clients, who would have been in 50 clients, Jyoti, myself. We are doing the Safe Architecture course. Today, this week, we have a special code of $500 off. So in case you're interested in what just happened, feel free to go. And the third thing is especially the fact that you being here is really, really important to us. And thanks a lot for coming in and helping us out. We will have Satya and Daryl staying back a bit, and I will just have one picture taken. But for any other questions, if you'd like to stay back and talk, they will be there for the next couple of minutes. If you can unshare the screen, Vijesh, I'll just take one quick picture with a big smile on everybody's face. Unshare, please.
All right.
Yes, awesome. Unshare the screen. Yeah, thank you. And I'm just going to take a picture. Cool. Say cheese.
And cheese.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. Once again, a big thanks from Incremental. We have Ashu, a special guest as well, saying hi from Jyoti's home. So thank you. And feel free to stay back to have a quick chat with Daryl and Satya as well. Thank you. Officially,
Thanks, everyone. I actually have to fly too. I've got to get my kids in bed.
Thanks, Daryl. Thank
No
you.
worries, Daryl.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you.
See you guys.
you.
See you guys.
All right.
Satya, can you stay back a minute?
I'm here. I'm here. Yes.
Isabel has something to ask.
Hey, Isabel.
Hi, Isabel. You're on mute.
Hey,
Hi.
do I hang on a second? Hang on. Let me just see. Am I missing? I'm reading through the chats. They're coming in thick and fast to see if I missed something. Oh, great presentation. Love it. I'm not from the tech field, so I always look at this from the business perspective. And I think we need more connection between how business understands
Absolutely.
the approach that we get through the developers, through the architects, through the I think you need an equivalent architect in business side, because there's no point having someone who understands the enabling and the facilitation of the technology, and it's lost when it goes into the real world. So I love joining in and listening to it. And what I find is so good about these is that the language is so understandable. There should be no excuse from people in business to say it's tech talk. So I thought you did that very well. So maybe it's less a question, more a comment, but it's always heartening to see that still holds true no matter how advanced we get in Agile, whether you're practicing SAFe or any other, or Lean or any other of your methodologies. The fundamentals is still true. If technology and business can't talk, you're sunk.
Yes, very rightly said. Very rightly put. Yes.
And Jyoti just mentioned Michael is a business architect as well, listening in. What's your thoughts, Michael?
Yeah, no, I was so glad that yeah, absolutely 100% agree with Isabel, because actually I came from a background as a solution architect, and then recently, 1.5 years ago, I moved to a business architect role, which is now I'm actually sitting with the business, reporting the business, working closely with the business, and then basically, well, in a way, representing the business, and then working with the people on the tech side now, like from the solution and technical or functional side, to actually delivering, well, product project, depends on how you say it, but yeah. So I'm Michael, yeah, so I'm actually really passionate and in what I'm doing now, and I see that's really valuable in terms of the changing the way that things working, not saying that, okay, they're all thinking of IT and business separately. It's actually, in the new world, it's actually it's one unit, if you think of it like that. I like to think of it that way.
Absolutely. And a lot of companies I see, they are actually bringing the two IT and the business groups sit together in one place.
That's exactly what we're doing.
That's exactly what is the goal, the thought process behind it.
Correct. Yes.
Couldn't add at that time when the guy was asking, because I had asked you, but he has a very valid point. Today, it's not possible, wherever I have worked, it is not possible for you to convince that we will do architecture incrementally. It's just not possible. I've not seen it specifically at scale. Any bank, and I've been working in banks only. Michael, remember even when we were at Osnet, they wanted to see the skeleton. Like even then they said, show us. So we had to move them to solution intent, solution context. We said, this is what the solution would look like. This is the goal that we're trying to reach. And we had created a diagram, but we did not do the whole nitty gritty of it. But the project managers, the business, they're scared to put money. Why would somebody put 10 to $20 million when they don't know what is the architecture? Because architecture drives everything. So it is very hard to convince them, even though, yes, SAFE says that, but still they will need that solution context and that, and it's maybe little easier to do it in product company because yes, you can see, touch a product that at the end you're going to get something like this, so you can do prototype. But when it is bank, where you're creating a function, where you're creating a service that you can't touch and feel, there's no prototype, then it's very hard to convince. That's my
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think you said it right. The solution intent, the roadmap, that's what helps give that vision to the people who are really looking for that big view, big picture view. Yeah.
Correct, and it's a change of the mindset, and there's like the people get used to, and there's that proven as like as in like we need these things to make sure that it's there, and then people just don't believe, or it's difficult for them to believe and say, hey, well, it's okay without those things. It's like it's until they actually see that happen and that works and that delivers the outcome. And that's where they start to, okay, yep, they can now finally experience through that and do that trust. Otherwise, even for myself, right, Jody would know, like